My mother-in-law looked her son in the eyes and said, "Your wife can skip her surgery. Your sister's wedding dress is more important." She didn't know I was standing right outside the door. She didn't know I heard every word. And she definitely didn't know that what happened 9 months later would silence her completely. If you've ever been treated like an inconvenience by the family of the person you love, stay right here. Because this story ends in the most unexpected way possible. Hit that subscribe button right now. Every week on this channel, I bring you stories about real women who held their ground when everything was stacked against them. You are going to want to see what's coming. Asterisk. My name is Sarah. I grew up in a small house in Columbus, Ohio with my mom and my stepfather, David. My biological father left when I was 3. I don't even have a clear memory of his face. Just a blurry outline, like a photograph left out in the rain. So when my mom married David, I was 7 years old and desperately hoping for something solid. Something permanent. David was a quiet man, carpenter by trade. Calloused hands, kind eyes, never raised his voice once in his life. He smelled like sawdust and old coffee, and every Saturday morning he'd make pancakes shaped like animals because he said, "A good breakfast should make you smile before you even take a bite." He wasn't perfect, but he was present. And for a little girl who had already learned what absence felt like, that meant everything. My mom, Linda, was different. Beautiful, sharp, restless. She loved David in her own way, I think. But she also loved control. She loved being the center of every room. And as the years went by, something shifted between them. Quiet arguments behind closed doors, long silences at the dinner table, a coldness that crept in like a draft you couldn't find the source of. By the time I was 16, their marriage was more of a shared address than a real partnership. When I turned 18, I left for college in Pittsburgh. Scholarships, student loans, 2 part-time jobs. I built my own life, brick by brick. I didn't have much, but it was mine. David called every Sunday, without fail. Rain, snow, holidays, Sunday at 11 a.m. My phone would ring and it would be him. He'd ask about my classes, my friends, whether I was eating enough. Small things. But those small things were the scaffolding holding me together during the hardest years of my life. My mom called too, but her calls were different. They were updates, reports. She'd tell me what was happening with her friends, her job, her frustrations with David. I was less her daughter in those moments and more her audience. I graduated, got a job in Chicago, built a real career in marketing. And somewhere in those years of building, I slowly stopped going home as often. It was easier to avoid the tension, easier to love my mom from a distance. But I always stayed close to David. I was 31 when David called on a Tuesday, not a Sunday. I knew immediately something was wrong. "Sarah," he said, and his voice had that particular quiet that people get when they're trying to be brave. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not cry until I finish talking. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. I cried before he finished the sentence. The next 18 months were the longest of my life. I flew to Columbus every month. Sometimes every 2 weeks. I watched the strong, quiet man shrink. Slowly, then all at once. I sat with him through chemo appointments. I fixed things around the house that he could no longer fix himself. I learned what his favorite soup was, and I learned that he hated the way hospital socks never stayed up. My mom was there too physically, but there was something detached about her presence. Like she was already grieving something other than him. Like she was already calculating. I didn't let myself think about that too hard. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about a man who had watched Hannah for 3 years and concluded, correctly, based on everything she'd been taught about herself, that her fear of being alone was a lever he could pull. If you feel that in your chest right now, if you know that feeling, this channel was built for you. Subscribe right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And stay with me, because what Hannah did next is the part that matters. 3 weeks before David died, he asked to speak to me alone. Mom had stepped out to get groceries. We were in his bedroom, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard he'd landscaped himself, every bush and flower placed with intention. He looked small in that big bed. but his eyes were clear. "I want to talk to you about the house," he said. I shook my head. "David, you don't have to." "Sarah." His voice, even weakened, still had that quiet authority. "Let me finish." He told me he'd updated his will 2 years earlier, shortly after his diagnosis. The house, the one he'd owned before he ever met my mother, the one he'd paid for entirely on his own. He was leaving to me. Not to my mom. To me. I sat there in complete silence, trying to understand what he was saying. "Your mother has her own income, her own savings," he said carefully. "She'll be okay. But you've been on your own since 18. You've worked for everything. And I want you to have something solid. Something that's yours." I started crying. "I also know," he said quietly, "that she's not going to take this well, and I'm sorry for putting that on you. But I need you to be strong, Sarah. Don't let anyone bully you out of what's yours." He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "You were always my kid. From the day I met you. I just never said it enough. If the story is moving you, and I can feel that it is, do me one favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. Because I promise you, the rest of the story is going to change the way you think about family, about loyalty, about what you actually owe the people who hurt you. Don't miss the ending." David passed on a quiet Thursday morning in October. The leaves were turning outside his window. I'd like to think he chose a beautiful day on purpose. The funeral was small. David wasn't a man with a wide social circle. He was a man with deep roots. His coworkers came. His brother flew in from Arizona. Some neighbors. A few old friends. My mom stood at the front in a black dress, accepting condolences with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed this. I stood beside her because that's what you do. But I noticed, even in my grief, that she kept looking at me. A particular look. Measuring. Like she was trying to figure out what I knew. The answer to that question came sooner than I expected. For days after the funeral, my mom called me into the kitchen. She'd made coffee. That was my first warning sign. She only made coffee when she wanted something. She sat across from me at the table David had built with his own hands, and she folded hers neatly in front of her. And she said, "I spoke to the attorney. I know what the will says." I said nothing. "I want you to know," she continued, her voice perfectly controlled, "that I will contest it. That house was my home for 22 years. I have rights. And if you try to claim it, I will spend every penny I have to fight you in court." The room felt very still. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I thought about David in that hospital bed, squeezing my hand, telling me to be strong. I took a slow breath. "Mom," I said, "I'm not going to fight with you today. We just buried David 4 days ago." "Then sign the house over to me," she said simply, "and there won't be a fight." "I'm not doing that either." Her eyes went cold in that way I'd known since childhood. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "He wasn't even your real father," she said. And there it was. The sentence she'd been holding in reserve like a weapon, waiting for the right moment to use it. I felt it land. I won't pretend I didn't. But I also felt something else underneath the pain, something firm. Something David had placed there deliberately. "No," I said quietly. "He wasn't my biological father. He was something better than that. He was the person who chose to show up. Every single day. For 24 years. She opened her mouth. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I'm going to honor what he wanted. And I'm going to ask you not to contact me again about this until you're ready to have a different kind of conversation." I stood up, picked up my untouched coffee, set it in the sink, and walked out of that kitchen. She followed through on her threat. Her attorney sent a letter within 2 weeks. Grounds for contesting undue influence, claim that David was not of sound mind at the time the will was revised. It was a long shot legally, but it was designed to be expensive and emotionally exhausting. I won't lie, there were nights I almost gave in. Not because I thought she was right, but because I was tired. Grief is exhausting enough. Grief plus a legal battle plus the social pressure of extended family members calling to tell me I was being selfish. That combination nearly broke me. My aunt called. "Your mother is alone now. How could you do this to her?" David's brother, Mike, called. But his call was different. He told me what he'd decided, Mike said. He told me why. You fight for it, Sarah. Don't you dare give up. I held on to that. I got a good attorney. I gathered documentation. I had the original deed showing the house had been David's before the marriage. I had testimony from his doctor that he had been completely competent at the time of the will revision. I had the will itself clear and precise, with a handwritten note attached in David's unmistakable handwriting. I leave my house at 4417 Elmwood Drive to my daughter, Sarah. She earned this. David. He had written daughter. My attorney called the case straightforward. The judge agreed. 7 months after David died, the house was legally, officially mine. My mother didn't call when the ruling came through. I didn't call her either. I drove to Columbus alone on a Saturday in May. Let myself into the house with the key I'd been given. Stood in the entryway for a long time, just breathing. It smelled like him still, faintly. Sawdust and old wood and something I couldn't name but recognized completely. I walked through every room slowly. The kitchen where he'd made those Saturday pancakes. The living room with the built-in bookshelves he'd constructed himself, still full of his books on woodworking and history, and one very worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that he'd recommended to me when I was 12. The backyard with the garden he'd tended every spring. I sat down on the back porch steps, and I cried. Not the desperate grief crying of the early weeks, but something quieter and more complete. The kind of crying that actually empties something out and leaves space for something new. He had given me something real, not just the house. He had given me proof, physical, legal, undeniable proof, that I had been chosen, that I had mattered, that someone had seen me and decided, she's worth fighting for, even after I'm gone. I moved to Columbus 6 months later. I kept my remote job. I renovated the house slowly, carefully, keeping everything that felt like him, updating what needed updating. I refinished the floors myself, watching YouTube tutorials late at night, probably doing it wrong the first 4 times. I think David would have found that funny. My mom and I are not close. I don't think we will be, at least not for a long time. She has her life. I have mine. On her birthday last year, I sent flowers. She sent a brief text. Thank you. 2 words. But they were 2 words more than I expected. I don't know what the future holds for us. What I do know is this. I am 33 years old. I live in a house built by a man who loved me without obligation, without biology demanding it, without anything to gain. He loved me because he decided to. Every single day for 24 years he decided again. That is the most powerful thing one person can do for another. And this house, these walls, this yard, these creaking floors, they are his last decision in my favor. I walk through the door every day and I feel it. Chosen. If you made it to the end of this story, then you already know that this wasn't just about a house. It was about every person who ever showed up for you when they didn't have to. Every person who chose you. And every person who tried to make you feel like you were worth less than you are. David knew his daughter's worth, even when others tried to diminish it. If the story touched something in you, if you've ever had someone fight for you, or if you're still waiting for someone to, I want you to do one thing right now. Hit that subscribe button. Because this channel exists for exactly this reason. To remind you that your story matters. That quiet love is still love. That choosing yourself is not selfish. Every week, I bring you stories that hit the places words usually can't reach. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, being chosen even once, even by one person, is enough to change everything.